3 days before my son's retirement ceremony, I drove to the dry cleaner on Maple Street to pick up the blazer I planned to wear. The woman behind the counter, Connie, who had pressed my husband's shirts for 22 years, took one look at me and said, very quietly, "Come to the back, right now." I almost laughed. Connie was not a dramatic person. She was the kind of woman who measured everything twice and said very little. So when she touched my arm and pulled me past the pressing machines and the rolls of plastic wrap into the little storage room at the back of her shop, I went without argument. She closed the door. The room smelled like steam and old wood. "I need you to listen," she said, "and I need you to be very still." I didn't have time to ask why. The wall beside us was thin. On the other side was the small office she rented to a tax consultant 2 days a week, and through that wall came voices I recognized. My son's voice, and a man I would later learn was his financial advisor. "The power of attorney is already drafted," the man said. "Once she signs the health directive Friday, we move the annuity first, then the property trust. The Millbrook account closes by the following Wednesday." My son said, "She won't ask questions. She never does with paperwork. She trusts me." The other man said, "And the house?" A pause. "Then the house goes last. We keep her there until the care facility confirms the bed." Connie's hand found mine in the dim light and held on. I stood completely still. I counted my own heartbeats because it was the only thing I could do. 14, 15, 16. The voices moved away. A door opened somewhere. Then silence. Connie turned to me. Her eyes were wet. "They were here Monday too," she said. "Same conversation. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if I was understanding it right." She shook her head. "But then they said your name." I asked her what name they used. "They said Vivienne," she said. "They said she'll do whatever you tell her. She always has. I am 67 years old. I raised my son alone after his father left when the boy was 4. I worked as a hospital administrator for 31 years, managed a budget of over $12 million annually, negotiated contracts with insurance companies that had entire legal departments, and never once, not once, did anyone in a professional setting tell me I did not understand paperwork. I picked up my blazer from the front counter. I paid Connie for the cleaning. I told her I would call her. Then I walked to my car and sat in a driver's seat with the engine off and the blazer folded in my lap. The retirement ceremony was Friday evening. My son had organized it himself. He'd invited 60 people. Colleagues, neighbors, my sister and her husband driving in from Roanoke. He had booked the private room at the Fieldstone Inn and arranged for a cake with my name on it. He had also, apparently, arranged for me to sign away everything I owned. My husband Gerald passed in 2014. Pancreatic cancer, 14 weeks from diagnosis to the end. He was 61. We had been married 38 years, and in the months after he died, I sat in the same car in the same driveway and tried to understand how a life that had felt so solid could empty out so completely. I survived it because I went back to work. I poured everything I had into the hospital. I worked until I had something to show for the years, a pension, a paid house, a modest investment portfolio, and a revocable trust Gerald and I had set up in 2009. The Whitfield Family Trust, named for Gerald's mother. Inside it, the house on Carver Lane, $240,000 in managed investments, and a variable annuity worth roughly $180,000. Not a fortune, but it was ours, mine, everything we had built. My son's name was on the trust as successor trustee. That had seemed, at the time, like a reasonable thing. He was my only child. I trusted him. I sat in my car outside the dry cleaner, and I thought about all of this. And then I thought, I have 72 hours. I did not cry. I started the engine. My attorney's name is Francis. I have used him for estate matters since 2011. He is 70, partly retired, works Tuesday through Thursday out of a small office above the jewelry store on Central Avenue. I called him from the parking lot and he picked up on the second ring. I said, "I need to see you today. It's about the trust." He said, "Come now." I told him everything. He listened the way good attorneys listen, without interrupting, without reassuring, without making you feel like you are being dramatic. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and was quiet for a moment. "The health directive," he said. "Has he shown you one?" "He mentioned it 2 weeks ago, said it was routine." Said my old one from 2010 needed updating. "Did he give you a document to review?" "He said he'd bring it Friday, at the ceremony." Francis nodded slowly. "Then we have time." "Not much, but enough." He pulled out a legal pad. "I need to know who the financial advisor is, the one in that office." I didn't have a name. I had a voice. "Then we find the name," he said. "Walk me through every financial account your son has access to." We spent 2 hours at his desk. I told him about the annuity, the trust, the savings account where I'd been depositing my pension checks, the small brokerage account I'd opened in 2019 with Gerald's life insurance payout, 60,000, now sitting at around 74. I told him my son had accompanied me to every meeting with my financial planner for the past 3 years. He had always said he wanted to learn, that he wanted to be able to help me manage things as I got older. Francis's expression did not change, but he wrote everything down very carefully. "There's something else," I said. He looked up. 6 months ago, my son started suggesting I was making mistakes, small things. He said I'd forgotten a dinner we had planned. I hadn't forgotten he'd changed the time and not told me. He said I paid a bill twice. I had, but only because the automated payment had been set up in addition to my manual one. Something that happened when he helped me set up the account online. I folded my hands. He took me to my primary care physician in February and mentioned his concerns about my memory. My doctor ordered a cognitive screening. I passed easily. My son told me afterward that the doctor had spoken to him privately and said I should be monitored. "Did the doctor say that to you directly?" "No. I assumed he was being cautious." Francis set down his pen. "Do you have a relationship with your doctor that predates your son's involvement?" 20 years. Dr. Amelia Park. She delivered my grandson. "Call her," he said. "Today, ask her what she told your son in February. Get her answer in writing if you can." I left his office at 4:30. I called Dr. Park from my car. Her nurse said the doctor was with a patient. I left a message. I asked for a call back before end of day. Then I drove home and did the thing I had been avoiding. I went into my son's old bedroom, which I use now as an office, and I sat at the desk where I pay my bills and keep my files. I opened the bottom drawer. I pulled out the folder marked Trust, Twitfund, and I read every page of the document Gerald and I had signed in 2009 and amended in 2016. The successor trustee language was clear. Upon my incapacity, defined as certification by 2 licensed physicians, my son became sole trustee with full authority to manage, sell, or distribute all trust assets. 2 physicians. Dr. Park was one. I sat with that for a long time. At 6, my phone buzzed. "Dr. Park, Vivienne," she said. "Your message said it was important." I told her I needed to know exactly what she had told my son after my cognitive screening in February. There was a pause. "I told him your results were normal," she said. I told him there was no clinical indication of memory impairment. I told him that if he had concerns, he was welcome to discuss them with you directly, but that from a medical standpoint, I saw nothing to worry about. "Did you document that?" "Of course. It's in your chart. Did he ask you anything else?" Another pause, longer this time. He asked me whether, if a family member continued to have concerns, there was a process for requesting an independent evaluation. I told him yes, there was, and that it typically required the patient's consent or a court order. I closed my eyes. "Vivienne, is everything all right?" I said. "Not entirely, but it will be. May I come in tomorrow and get a printed copy of my cognitive screening results and your notes from that conversation? She said yes without hesitation. That night, my housekeeper, Bettina, found me still at the desk at 9 o'clock. She had been with me for 11 years. She was 72, moved more slowly than she used to, but she knew every corner of my house and every mood I carried. She stood in the doorway with a dish towel over her shoulder and looked at the papers spread in front of me. "You haven't eaten," she said. "I know." She didn't ask what I was doing. She went to the kitchen and came back with a bowl of soup and a piece of bread. She set it beside me. Then she sat down in the chair across the desk. "He called today," she said, "while you were out." I looked up. "My son?" He asked if the papers from the attorney's office had arrived. I said I hadn't seen anything. He said they might come by courier and to put them on the hall table for you. She paused. I said I would. "Did anything come?" "An envelope. It's on the table." I went to the hall. The envelope was sealed, return address from a firm I didn't recognize, Greystone Advisors, LLC, on Franklin Avenue in Westport. I brought it back to the desk and opened it carefully. Inside was a 4-page document. Across the top, updated durable power of attorney and healthcare directive, Vivienne R. Whitfield. The first 3 pages were standard. I had seen language like this before, but on page 4, in a section labeled Additional Provisions Financial Management, was a clause I had not seen in any previous document. Upon certification of diminished capacity by any licensed medical professional, all financial accounts, investment portfolios, and real property held in the Whitfield Family Trust shall transfer immediately to the successor trustee, who shall have sole and unreviewable authority to liquidate, transfer, or otherwise dispose of said assets as deemed appropriate in the successor trustee's judgment, without further oversight or court supervision. I read it 3 times. Any licensed medical professional, not 2, 1, and unreviewable. I called Francis at 9:15. He answered, which told me he had been expecting my call. I read him the clause. He was quiet for 4 seconds. Then he said, "Don't sign anything. Don't acknowledge receiving that document. I'll be at the courthouse when it opens tomorrow morning." I asked him what we could do. "We can file for an emergency protective order to freeze the trust assets pending a fraud review. We can also request an independent capacity evaluation that would supersede any single physician's assessment. And," he paused, "we need to know who is behind Greystone Advisors." I asked how we would find that. "I have someone," he said. "His name is Preston. He used to work financial crimes for the FBI. He's discreet and he's fast. I've used him twice. Give me until morning." I said good night. I sat in Gerald's chair and looked at his photograph on the shelf. It was from 1998. He was standing in front of the house the summer we repainted it. He looked completely, unremarkably happy. "I have kept my promise," I told him. "I am keeping it still." Bettina appeared in the doorway again. "You should sleep," she said. "I know." "He loves you," she said quietly. "He does. But loving someone and doing right by them are not always the same thing." I looked at her. "Did you hear something? When he called today?" She pressed her lips together. "He called twice. The second time he asked if you seemed confused about anything lately, if you'd been misplacing things, if I was worried about you." She met my eyes. I told him you were the sharpest woman I had ever worked for, and that whoever was filling his head with concerns should mind their own business. I almost smiled for the first time in 12 hours. Preston called Francis at 7 the next morning. Francis called me at 7:15. "Greystone Advisors, LLC, he said, incorporated in Delaware 8 months ago. 2 principals. Your son and a man named Harrison Cole. Cole has a registered investment advisor license in Connecticut, barely. He was sanctioned by FinRay in 2021 for unsuitable investment recommendations. Fined $12,000. His previous firm let him go. He set up Greystone 6 months after that." I sat down. There's more, Francis said. Cole has done this before. Not identically, but the pattern is there. In 2020, he was the financial advisor for a widow in Fairfield. 74 years old, estate worth roughly $300,000. Her son was his client. The woman signed a similar directive after a health scare. 18 months later, the estate was largely depleted. Cole walked away. The son claimed the losses were market-related. He paused. The woman died in 2022. There were no charges. Her daughter-in-law tried to file a complaint, but the documentation was insufficient. The room felt very small. And before her, I asked, "We're still looking?" But Preston says Cole has the profile of someone who has done this more than twice. I asked Francis what we needed. 3 things, he said. First, Dr. Park's documentation, which you're getting this morning. Second, a declaration from you about the conversation you overheard with Connie as a corroborating witness. Third, evidence of Cole's financial history. Preston is working on that now. And the ceremony is tomorrow evening. I know. Here is what I propose. He told me the plan. When he finished, I asked him one question. Do you think my son knew what Cole was doing to that woman in Fairfield? Silence. Then, I think your son found someone who offered him a solution to a problem he didn't know how to solve any other way. I don't think that excuses him. But I think the full story is more complicated than a yes or no. I picked up Dr. Park's documents at 9. I called Connie at 10. She answered on the first ring, and when I explained what I needed from her, she said only, "Tell me when and where." By noon, Preston had put together a file, 3 folders, financial records on Greystone advisors, Cole's FINRA sanction history, and a partial reconstruction of the Fairfield case drawn from probate court records that were technically public but practically buried. I read through all of it at Francis's conference table while he sat across from me and did not say much. I want to describe what it feels like to read documentation proving that the child you raised, the person you organized your entire adult life around protecting, has been participating, knowingly or not, in a plan to take everything you have and put you in a facility before you turn 70. It feels like a very specific kind of cold. Not the cold of a winter morning, the cold of a room where the heat has been off for days and you only now realize it. I set down the last page. What time does the ceremony start tomorrow? Francis asked. 6 o'clock. Cocktail hour at 5:30. He nodded. Here's what's going to happen. The ceremony went exactly as planned. The private room at the Fieldstone Inn was beautiful. White tablecloths, low centerpieces, a small podium with a microphone at the front. My son had done a lovely job. That was the thing I kept noticing, how well he had planned it. My sister and her husband arrived from Roanoke. She hugged me at the door, and I held on for a moment longer than usual. "You look pale," she murmured. "I'm fine," I said. "Stay close tonight." She looked at me carefully but said nothing. My son found me at 5:45, just as the room was filling up. He was in a navy blazer, the one I had given him for Christmas 3 years ago. He looked handsome and he looked nervous and he looked at me with something I can only describe as guilt dressed up as love. "Mom," he said. He hugged me. "I'm so glad you're here." "Where else would I be?" I said. He laughed. "There's some paperwork I want to go over with you afterward. Nothing complicated, just the directive update we talked about." "Of course," I said. "After the speeches." Harrison Cole was there. I spotted him near the bar, 50s, silver at his temples, the kind of careful posture that people adopt when they want to seem relaxed and aren't. He shook my hand when my son introduced us and said he had heard so much about me. I said I had heard about him too. Something shifted behind his eyes. Just briefly. At 6:30, my son stood at the podium and gave a toast. He talked about my career, about Gerald, about the years when it was just the 2 of us, and how I had never let him feel like something was missing. He cried. Genuinely, I think, which made all of it harder and clearer at the same time. At 7, the MC introduced me. I walked to the podium. 60 faces, most of them kind, all of them expecting a gracious, brief thank you from a retired hospital administrator who was happy to slow down and let her family take care of things. I set my notes on the podium. I looked at my son. He was smiling. I said, 31 years ago, I took a job as an assistant administrator at Merritt Regional Hospital. I had a 4-year-old at home, a mortgage I wasn't sure I could cover, and a very clear sense of what I could and could not afford to lose. I never forgot that feeling. It made me careful. I paused. I want to talk tonight about trust, not the legal kind, though we'll get to that, the human kind. The kind that takes years to build and can be destroyed in a single conversation overheard through a thin wall. The room shifted. My son's smile did not exactly disappear, but it changed. I said, 3 days ago, I went to pick up my dry cleaning from a woman who has pressed my clothes for over 2 decades. She pulled me into the back room and asked me to listen. I listened. I looked at Harrison Cole. I heard my son and his financial advisor discussing a document I had never been shown. They discussed the timing of a power of attorney. They discussed the liquidation of my trust. They discussed a care facility. They used my name. And they said, these are the exact words. She'll do whatever you tell her. She always has. The room was completely silent. I pressed a small remote in my hand. Behind me, a screen I had not called attention to lit up. It showed a document. The 4-page directive from Greystone Advisors. The 4th page was enlarged. The clause was highlighted. This, I said, was delivered to my home by courier 2 days ago. I was meant to sign it tomorrow, at this table. After the speeches, someone near the back said, "Oh my God," my son stood. "Mom, please sit down." My voice was steady. "I would like you to hear this." He sat. I said, "Harrison Cole, the man standing near the bar, is the principal of Greystone Advisors, LLC, incorporated in Delaware 8 months ago. He has a FinRe sanction on his record from 2021 for unsuitable investment recommendations. In 2020, he worked with another family in this state, an elderly widow. Her estate was depleted over 18 months. She died in 2022 with very little left. Cole set down his glass and moved toward the exit. Francis's voice, from the table near the door, "Mr. Cole, I'd stay if I were you. The officers in the lobby are there at my request." Cole stopped. I turned back to the room. "The Whitfield Family Trust," I said, "has been frozen as of this afternoon by emergency protective order filed in Fairfield County Superior Court. All accounts are preserved. No transfer can occur." I looked at my son. "My attorney has filed a formal complaint with the Connecticut Department of Banking regarding Greystone Advisors. The FinRe Review Board has been notified of Mr. Joman Cole's involvement in 2 separate cases of suspected elder financial exploitation." My son's face was, I don't have the right word for it, not anger, not fear, something between the two that looked like a person recognizing very suddenly exactly where they are and how they got there. 2 officers came in from the lobby. They spoke quietly to Harrison Cole. He did not resist. He walked out between them without looking back. The room was silent for a long moment. My sister was gripping her husband's arm. Several of my colleagues were on their feet. An old friend from the hospital, a woman who had known Gerald and knew what this trust represented, covered her mouth with her hand. I turned off the microphone. My son did not move for a long time. When he finally came to me, the room had mostly emptied. A few people lingered. Bettina, who I'd asked to come, sat quietly in the corner with her hands folded. He stood in front of me, and he looked smaller. That is the only word. He looked like the 4-year-old I used to find sitting at the top of the stairs after a bad dream, waiting for me to notice him. "Mom," he said, "I didn't. It wasn't supposed to." I said, "I know it wasn't supposed to go the way it went." "Sit down." We sat at the end of the table, the two of us, with the wreckage of the evening around us. He told me it took a long time. He had met Harrison Cole through a mutual connection 18 months ago. At that time, my son was in debt, credit cards, a failed investment in a friend's business, a second mortgage on his own house he had not told me about. He was drowning, and he was too ashamed to say so. Cole had presented himself as a financial consultant specializing in estate management for aging parents. He had shown my son case studies. He had used words like asset protection and proactive planning. He had told my son that the kindest thing a child could do was to take the burden of financial management off a parent before a crisis forced it. My son had wanted to believe him because the alternative was admitting he needed help. "I didn't know about the woman in Fairfield," he said. "I swear I didn't know he had done this before." "But you knew the directive gave you unreviewable authority." He looked at the table. "He said it was standard language. Did you read it?" A pause. "Not all of it. I sat with that. What I cannot understand," I said finally, "is the facility." "The care facility. Were you planning to put me somewhere?" He flinched. "Cole said it was a contingency, in case your health declined. My health has not declined. I know." His voice broke. "I know that. I think I let him tell me a story about you that was easier than the truth." I asked what the truth was. He was quiet for a long time. "I was angry," he said. "I have been angry for years. You gave everything to that hospital. You missed things. When Dad died, you went back to work in 3 weeks. I needed you, and I felt like the company always came first. And then when you retired and I thought things would be different, you were still so capable, so in control. I didn't know how to reach you." I looked at my son, 51 years old, my son. "Why didn't you just tell me?" I asked. "Because you would have fixed it," he said, "and I didn't want to be fixed. I wanted to matter." That night I sat alone in Gerald's office, in the chair where I always sit, with his photograph in front of me and the quiet of the house around me. Bettina had gone home, the oak tree, no. The maple in the backyard, the maple Gerald had planted the year we bought the house. I could see it through the window, bare in the March cold. I had won. The trust was intact. The accounts were frozen and would be restored. Cole was in custody, and Francis was confident the case would hold. Preston was working with the state banking department on the broader pattern. There might be other families. I had protected everything Gerald and I had built, and I sat in the silence and thought about what my son had said. I was angry. I felt like the company always came first. I thought about the 3 weeks after Gerald died when I went back to work. I had told myself it was because we needed the insurance, needed the pension contributions, needed the distraction. All of that was true. But I also remembered sitting in my office at 7 in the morning with the door closed and a cup of coffee and the particular relief of a problem I knew how to solve. Gerald's death was not a problem I knew how to solve. The quarterly budget was. I had chosen the quarterly budget, not because I didn't love my son, because I didn't know how to stay in the grief with him. That was not his fault. It was also not a reason to sign away my life's work. Both things were true. Harrison Cole was charged the following month: fraud, elder financial exploitation, and breach of fiduciary duty. The Fairfield case was reopened based on Preston's documentation. 2 additional complaints surfaced from other states. Cole's license was suspended pending the outcome of criminal proceedings. My son was not charged. The prosecutors found insufficient evidence of criminal intent on his part. He had signed documents and relayed instructions, but Cole had structured things deliberately to insulate the clients from direct liability. Francis said this was typical of how these arrangements worked. Cole was the mechanism. My son had been the door. He hired an attorney. He entered into a payment plan to address his debts, with a small loan from me, a formal one, documented with terms. It was not a gift. It was a transaction. He understood the difference. In May, he came to the house for dinner. Bettina made pot roast. We ate at the kitchen table, not the dining room. He asked about the trust. I told him I had amended it. A professional corporate trustee would serve as successor, with him named as a discretionary beneficiary. He nodded. He did not argue. After dinner, we sat on the back porch. The maple was coming back in, small green leaves, tentative. I told him about the night Gerald planted it, how we had argued about where to put it, and Gerald had said, "Put it where you can see it from the kitchen, so every morning when you make coffee you'll see something growing." My son had not heard that story. He was too young when it happened, and we had never told him. He listened. He asked questions. We stayed outside until it got cold. I don't know what we are now, not what we were before, which was built on a version of closeness that was really just proximity. Something else. Something that has to be chosen every day, consciously, by both of us. He calls on Sundays. We talk about ordinary things, mostly. Once in a while, something harder. I had a conversation with my sister about it, driving back from a Sunday lunch in the spring. She said, "Do you forgive him?" I thought about it for a long time. "I'm working on understanding him first," I said. "Forgiveness might come after." She said that sounded right. In June, I drove past the dry cleaner on Maple Street and stopped. Connie was behind the counter, same as always. I brought her a plant, a small gardenia in a terracotta pot. She looked at it and then at me and said, "You didn't have to do that." I said, "You held my hand in the dark. You did that without knowing what it would cost you." She set the plant on the counter beside the register. "Did it cost me anything? It cost you the rental income. Cole's firm was using that office." She shrugged. "It wasn't worth what it was paying me." I thought about that for a while afterward. What things are worth and what they cost. How rarely those two numbers are the same. I still live on Carver Lane. I still have coffee in the mornings and look at the maple Gerald planted. I joined a reading group at the library on Thursday evenings. 7 women, mostly retired. One who brings wine she pretends is lemonade. I laughed for the first time in a long time at that group, a real laugh, the kind that surprises you. I am 67 years old. I spent 31 years being indispensable at work, and I am not sure I was ever as indispensable at work, and I am not sure I was ever as indispensable at home. That is the thing I carry now. Not the fraud, not Cole, not the fear of what almost happened to the trust. Those things are resolved. They have court dates and file numbers, and they belong to lawyers now. What I carry is the look on my son's face when he said, "I felt like the company always came first. I cannot undo 30 years. But I can show up on Sunday. I can tell him the story about the maple tree. I can let him see me. Not the administrator, not the widow who held everything together, not the woman who survived, just me, his mother, still here. If you are watching this and you have built something, a career, a portfolio, a house, a life, please hear me. The people who want to take those things from you will always find a door. Make sure the people you love are not standing in front of it, angry and unheard, because you forgot to let them in. I nearly lost everything I had to a man I never should have trusted, but the crack he walked through was one I had made myself over years. One missed dinner and one closed office door at a time. Don't make my mistake. Choose presence. Choose the hard conversation over the comfortable distance. Choose your family while you still have time to mean it. Thank you for staying with me through all of this. I would love to hear from you in the comments. What would you have done? Would you have walked back into that ceremony and said nothing? Or would you have stood at that podium and told the truth? I genuinely want to know. And if any part of this story stayed with you, I hope you'll subscribe to Royal Revenge, so you'll be here for what I share next. I have thought a lot about cause and effect since that afternoon at Connie's shop. Not in any grand or cosmic sense, just in the plain, honest way that you do when you are 67 years old and you can finally see the full shape of decisions you made decades ago. Harrison Cole did not appear in my son's life by accident. He appeared because my son was desperate, and my son was desperate in part because he had spent years feeling unseen in a house where the lights were always on, but the door was rarely open. That is not an excuse for what my son agreed to, but it is the cause, and I had a hand in it. I chose the cautiously budget over the grief. I chose the hospital over the kitchen table. I told myself I was building something for our future, and I was, but I was also avoiding the harder work of staying present in pain. My son watched me do that every day for years. He learned that what you build matters more than who you're building it with. I taught him that without ever meaning to. That is the thing about the choices we make quietly, over time. They do not announce themselves. They accumulate, and one day you are sitting in a storage room smelling like steam and cedar, listening through a thin wall, and you realize that the crack someone else walked through was a crack you made yourself, one closed door at a time. What saved me was not cleverness. Francis was clever. Preston was resourceful. The law was, for once, swift. What saved me was that I had spent 31 years making careful decisions under pressure, and when the moment came, I did not panic. I acted. That is what a life of discipline gives you, not immunity from crisis, but the steadiness to move through it without falling apart. That steadiness is worth more than any account balance. You cannot inherit it. You cannot fake it. You build it the same way you build anything that lasts, slowly, consistently, over years of choosing the harder right thing over the easier wrong one. Bettina knew something was wrong before I told her. She has always known, not because she is unusually perceptive, but because she showed up every day and paid attention. That is all it takes to really know a person. Showing up and paying attention. I was not always good at that with my son. I am trying to be better at it now. The Sunday calls are not dramatic. We talk about ordinary things. Last week he told me a story about a neighbor's dog that made me laugh out loud. It was nothing. It was everything. If I had to say what I have learned, and I am careful with that word because learning implies it is finished, and I do not think it ever is, it would be this: intelligence without presence is just performance. You can be the sharpest person in every room and still lose the things that matter most because you were too busy being capable to be available. I was capable for 31 years. I am still working on being available. The maple Gerald planted is leafing out again. I see it every morning from the kitchen window, the way he said I would. Something growing. That is enough on most days. That is more than enough.